So I'm Ryan Marquardt. I I run Wild Rose Pastures in northern Madison County. This year will be our 14th season. We started in 2007. We're currently we always over the years we've raised lots of different things, but we've always raised broilers, and I should say turkeys. We've always raised broilers and turkeys over that period of time. And then we've always used state inspected with the state stamp facilities because of what we do is we sell through the Iowa Food Cooperative. We have at times in the past sold through restaurants. We have sold through other retailers at times, like Wheatsfield at one point in time. So because we do use those types of facilities in addition to direct customer sales, we need the state inspected processing. So and over that time, we've processed at Golly's in Maxwell. We've processed at Hanson Poultry Processing outside of Kimballton. We've processed at Milo. And for many years we processed at Valley View. And we're down to Marquardt up in Green. The thing too, at some point in time, the red lockers stopped doing poultry processing, and we believe there was a tightening of the regulations with regards to salmonella and E. coli and the cross-purposing of facilities. So you kind of see those facilities fall away over the 14 years. And then Valley View basically closed because it's just the business model it didn't work very well. Like poultry processing plants, in many cases, they only run a few days a week, and when they do, and they only run like 6-7 months out of the year. So it's hard to, like, one, pay for your facilities, and two, have the people who work there, like, or own the facility and operate it, like, draw a substantive living from the facility. We used to also do further processing up at Story City. So Story City would allow us, at one point in time, allowed us to do smoked and sliced turkeys and chicken sausages. Since Story City stopped letting us do that, we don't have any place that'll let us do further processing at this point. And from a business standpoint, what that translated down to us is that, like, when you raise a turkey, it's a high dollar product. It takes a fair amount of time to produce. And if you don't sell it for Christmas, or usually you want to get it sold by Thanksgiving, and you might be able to sell it for the around Christmas holiday. But if you haven't for some reason been able to sell your turkeys by then, you're probably going to be stuck with this giant space-consuming boulder in your freezer. And so having the ability to take them in and slice them in half and get them smoked, sliced in half, and then sold for Easter was something that it let you be more cavalier about raising turkeys. Like, you could push your production further than you might think you could sell. Like it gave you a little bit more flexibility, at least. So not having that does increase the risk in raising turkeys. I mean, our turkey this year was one that was frozen from the previous year. So. And then we've done some on-farm processing. I've done, we processed at Joel Salatin's on our honeymoon. Way back when, and we've processed for several years. We processed with Galen Bontraker, who had, I don't know if he still farms, but had a farm near Kelowna. So, and then we've been looking at, like, policy solutions, like how do we support our mobile chicken processing and make that a more viable option, because it's nice to be able to bring the processor to you, and can we maybe process deer in these facilities during the off season? A lot of these poultry plants sit idle most of the year. They're not being used outside of really outside. Once you get past Thanksgiving, they pretty much shut down. We want to make sure that there's parity between our red meat and poultry processors. Like, I'm looking forward to having Matt talk today about, like, his situation with his plant, because we want to make sure that red meat lockers can in many instances do inspected kill on some day, and then the standard custom kill on another day, as long as the inspector's in-house. And why he wasn't able to do that is interesting. It's something that we want to explore, or something I'd love to hear more about. And then it's kind of, I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have. What else can we do? What else can we do to move this along? So that's all I had because I really wanted to focus on discussion. And let me end the screen share, hopefully, if I can get back to Zoom, or Greg can just, there's the button. Boom.
There you go.
So
Awesome.
yeah, and I'd love to other people to, if Matt or others are on there, or if Randy's on there, to go ahead and introduce themselves and where their situation is. So
perfect. Let's start. I know there's a couple producers on here that I've talked with that want to share their perspective. So I think that'll be a good segue. Right. And then if Duncan, if you want to share after Garen and Mark, that would be fantastic. So Garen, do you want to share kind of your perspective and what's happening over at Uncle G's?
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. It's exciting to see. I can see about a half score. I can see some of you, but there's like 40 or 50 people in the chat or the attendees list. That's awesome. My name's Garen Buttermore. I manage, or I think the wife's the owner anyway, of Uncle G's Farm. We're out in Boone County. I know Ryan from forever. He's awesome. Way to go, Ryan. Wish I could vote for you. Anyway, we raise hogs, but more specific to this roundtable is we've done poultry for many years. Well, I guess less than 5 because we've only been out here for 5 years, but that's many. We used Green. That lady at Green, she taught me how to back up a trailer. Love her. We went down to Valley View, and I'm so sad that they aren't there anymore. And since then, like two or 3 years ago, we did farmers markets, but the gnats, those buffalo gnats, they killed like hundreds of our chickens in one day. So we're like, oh, that sucks. Then we just started kind of raising them for ourselves. I don't know about y'all, but for 2020, we were just going to raise 100, 150, sell them to a few people, and we sold out. I had to order extra. It was the craziest year ever. So I'm taking a big leap and raising more. We direct market and we process on farm. So, fingers crossed, hopefully you guys are seeing that as well, and an increase in business for those of you that produce and do direct sales. But it is a huge problem not being able to have a processor that you can get the official tax stamp. No, that's the wrong word. For right, Second Amendment. So I'm happy to learn from all of you guys, but we raise this year will be just under 300 birds on pasture, on lawn. We have a long 7 acres, so it's not really a huge farm, but it's bigger than some. And yeah, exciting. Thank you, Greg, for inviting me. Nice to hear.
Awesome. Ryan. Thanks, Garen. Mark Westbrook, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Mark, and I run Solstice Farm in Waverly, Iowa, and we're a pretty small operation. We did about 700 birds last year. We do broilers, turkeys, and ducks. And the processing situation has always been a concern for us because there are so few of them, and with COVID last year, it became really a concern because we use Martsons in Green. We're lucky that they're pretty close to us, but it's a really small facility, and I was concerned that if they had a COVID outbreak in their employees, they'd be shut down, and we would have nowhere to take our birds. So we actually tried a new USDA plant in Minnesota last year, and it worked out okay, but it's a long drive. Had some problems, so not a great solution. One thing that has been brought up that I think could be a really workable idea would be to have a mobile processing unit that is kind of owned as a cooperative, and we have a schedule where we go and pick it up and it goes around to different farmers in the area. But that would take somebody, stepping up to lead that and be able to build it and get it approved by the state. There's some things maybe we'll get into later about the different ramifications of the the poultry exemption, we do a lot of our sales at farmers markets. So in order for us to sell our birds at farmers markets and process on farm, my understanding is we would have to get our processing facility approved by the state, and have a HACCP and a lot of things that you wouldn't have to do if you're just selling direct to customers. So that's something maybe we can get into later.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Let's bump over to Lance quick. Lance, do you want to share about what you guys did over in Western Iowa?
Sure. So back in about 2015, we got a USDA grant to kind of pilot a project where we aggregated poultry from producers in Southwest Iowa. The Kimballton plant had closed, which was the only state certified one. And so a lot of the producers were really struggling with where to process. So we found a USDA certified processor in Nebraska, and we got the producers together, and we worked with Dunkins, and they kind of helped us with the shipping. So we would get producers' birds, have them meet up in one or two drop-off locations, and then Dunkins took the birds to the processor in Nebraska, so then they could be sold at restaurants and across state lines. And that's a quick summary. We have a report on our website that has a lot more detail, and I can share that link in the chat. But there were a lot of challenges and a lot of different regulatory things that we had to work through. We did pilot we did it one time where we took the birds to the processor, but yeah, and so we definitely learned a lot through that experience. I think if we were to do it again, it would be easier, but there's just a lot of issues, especially with the regulations, like having a DOT number and paying people to haul birds, and there's regulations on that. And then again, just because we're going across state lines, there's regulations with that. So yeah, if anyone has questions about that, I'm happy to try to answer them, but I'll share the report that we did because it has a lot of detail and lessons learned in there.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Lance. Matt, do you want to talk about what's happening over at Dunkins?
Yeah, hello everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right. Well, hi, Greg and Ryan and Lance and everybody else. It's been a interesting 2020, and we're looking forward to 2021. But a little bit about our background. We've been doing poultry processing since 1987 as custom exempt, and then last year, well, this has been about a 3-year expansion. We did build a new facility for doing state inspected slaughter, so with the mark of inspection. And I know that Mark talked about mobile processing. We did do that too for a time in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa in the middle 90s. And there was some challenges associated with that. A lot of it had to do with when we got to the farm, no one had their chickens caught. They were all just kind of out running around. And so we kind of got roped into having to do that. And then having to heat up the scalder takes about 2 hours, and also power issues. So the scalder, you're looking at, if you're going to do mobile processing, you've got a scalder that's going to be about 150,000 BTUs. So it takes a pretty sizable amount of propane or natural gas, but in our case, propane, to run a scalder like that. So we were always, running out of propane. There was problems with the scalder, having propane available and not having it. We had some issues where it wouldn't pressurize right. So there were some challenges there. We tried hooking into people's bulk tanks. That was a bit of an issue. And also, like the plucker and cooling, it took a lot of electricity. So we were popping fuses and everything at the farmer's place. So at that point in time, that was challenging. We did it for about 3 or 4 years. So not that it doesn't work, but it was challenging. We gave it up and just stayed with custom processing there. But I just wanted to get that out on mobile processing. It's a nice concept. If someone has a really good setup that you can pull into and hook up, it would be something that you could do. And then you would be able to process up to underneath that exemption. Mark was talking about up to 20,000 chickens or poultry in the state of Iowa would cover you on that. And let's see, other than that, as far as our processing last year, we were dealing with COVID, where our inspector, there was a shortage in inspectors in Iowa, especially for poultry, and he needed to be trained better. So in our custom plant, we can go through about 100 birds an hour. Under our inspection plant, we were down to below 30 an hour. So, and that was our inspector really taking a long time to look at each bird. And so that was a bit of a challenge. But by the time June got here, our entire custom plant had booked out every day for the rest of the season, just from the demand of people wanting to fill their own freezers with custom birds. So that's a little bit about what happened last year. And chicks were a bit of an issue to get. I hope this year that's lightened up. It was a bit of a challenge too. So I'll throw it back to you guys.
All right, thanks, Matt. That's super informational. Let's bounce down to Tony. Do you want to talk about what you guys are doing at Regeneration Farms?
Yeah. Hi there. I'm Tony. I've been working with a group of folks in southeastern Minnesota for about 5 years. We've been building free-range production farms. We're trying to build a free-range organic poultry business, and we are growing perennial trees as well, primarily hazelnuts, elderberries, and some others. And we are working to build a brand called Tree Range Chicken. And the last few years, we've used a few different processing options. There's not very many, but we have not found any options where we can get packaging that we need and labeling that we need, and just all of the logistics all the way through the transport and processing and warehousing process in order for us to really fill some potential customers that we have talked with. And so we are working on, we've been working on brainstorming a lot of different ideas for processing. And we actually came across a used facility in northeastern Iowa last year, and we were able to secure funding and purchase that facility. And we're working through like probably a year process of getting that facility up and running. But there's a lot of challenges, like Matt said, all the way through the process. So we're working on that. We've just started working on that project to start up an existing small facility, and working through a lot on that project. And we're hoping to we're hoping to be running by the summer, late summer of this year. Hoping to be able to process 1,000 birds a day, USDA inspected. But there's a lot of uncertainties. We've worked through a few things, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Let's see. Randy, do you want to go next?
The chicken plucking truck. I've got a mobile trailer that I drive around from farm to farm and process chickens for the farm owners. The problem I'm having is that you can't get inspected that way. So it's just like a hired hand going out and processing chickens, and you can sell it. A lot of people want to be able to sell it to the market, and they can't get it through me to there, but they can still sell 1,000 birds off their farm a year without that inspection.
Yeah, how was your experience? Because I know like Lavon Griffune had you out at the farm when she had you out earlier in the spring, and then she invited Representative Landon out Which I know was like, oh shit, type of situation, you know, but you're like, oh crap, a rep's here, you know.
He just wanted to see how it worked and how it
That's
operated.
cool.
It went pretty good.
Yeah, she's been continuing to talk with him, so it's interesting to know, you know, like, you know, how there's some receptiveness, I think, to maybe looking at changing.
Yeah, to try to maybe get a certain different type of license for me. You know, I don't
Yeah.
know whether it compiles with certain knowledge and classes of food safety and handling and stuff like that to be able to get a different level of inspection.
Right.
That would be the best way to go with that. We can. He was talking about the burners and stuff, and I just use a turkey fryer with a big pot, and we can do 30 birds an hour with 3 people. So it works out pretty good. And then when they just go right back to their freezers.
Yep.
And then I do operate the Lehigh locker. So in the summertime, I do chickens. In the wintertime, I do deer. And that's all I do down there is deer. I've been looking at trying to expand and do chickens in the locker, but it's hard to get into. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. Anything else?
No, so now I'm just going to kind of open it up. That's some people I kind of planted, but are there others here that want to share? Otherwise, we can kind of talk about ways to kind of come together on some of these common issues.
This is Christy in Iowa City. Isn't it possible to arrange for a USDA inspection on a mobile unit?
From what I've been told, it's private property when you go on there. I've been trying to ask them to come out just to see my facility and how I operate, and nobody will show up because it's private property. That's what I keep getting told.
All right. I'll for some reason I thought there were other mobile units elsewhere in this other states that did have USDA inspection, but maybe that was someone's wish. I can research it. But PFI or Iowa State, anybody from there, they're not aware of any mobile USDA inspected mobile units anywhere.
I'm not aware of any in Iowa for sure.
Yeah, other states have it, but it's based on their state regulations, not necessarily in Iowa. The Iowa regulation is prohibiting that, I think, as well.
So we just have to work with our legislatures to get that approved, right?
Yes, in theory, that is. I mean, the thing you always have to think about too with legislation is like you might want to get to XYZ point, but the reality is, in order to, the way most legislation works at the Capitol is incrementalism. And so how do we, what are the next pieces we can chisel off of this block to get where we want to go, you know, in bites, because small bites is much easier to make than a big one usually. So some progress is much easier than getting your final destination sometimes. So.
Yeah. So I'm also with the Iowa wine growers, and we've made really good inroads with our legislature, and they've been really supportive of ag recommendations and small farmer recommendations over the last couple of years. So I'd be, if there was a group who'd be interested in pulling that together, I would help with that advocacy movement.
That would be amazing, because I think we have people who are interested in seeing progress, and it's just a matter of like finding some way or some way to pull all these people together to like get them to apply pressure and figure out what changes we come to some agreement about, what changes we need to make, or what we need to attack in the code, and then apply pressure. So,
Ryan, this is Garen at Uncle G's farm. Is it more legislation, or can this be approached to the rules making process? And if so, do you know the rule making body for Department of Inspections Appeals, or is it Department of Ag like Christy was just talking about?
I think it's Department of Inspection and Appeals, which I think would be less receptive than a Republican legislators might be. So it may be, I think you might have more success personally from a down from, yeah. I mean, generally they would be more, they would tend to lean to be maybe a little more adverse to regulation. And so you could play to their desires or their
Yeah.
We're supportive of ag state and letting
right.
people be very supportive of people, making sure that they are being able to make a living on rural areas and small farms. Been really good support for small farmers.
I guess ideally you would have a Republican or a sympathetic legislator show up at a rules making meeting. But things like the warehouse license that we've been talking about in the chat, it could totally be part of code, but to me that seems like a rules thing, and
it probably is a rules
would be
thing.
way easier to change rules than to try to get 100 votes.
So for people who don't know, the warehousing permits that you would get to store, a home, that's just your warehousing permit in general. Like
I mean, if you have inspected
freezer.
poultry, yeah, you need to have, in order to sell it, not only do you have to have the birds inspected, but if you're going to store them on your property, the freezers have to be inspected.
And if you get a farmer's market permit, they'll cross-reference that against your freezer permit. So you need to have one. And it used to be there were different tiers and there still are different tiers that you can pay annually. But if you get inspected the first time, you pay the highest tier. That's just the rule on it now. So you pay the same amount to get, like, let's say I got like 5 chest freezers or 2 or 3 chest freezers. I want to get inspected. You pay the same amount on that as you would a 10,000 or 100,000 plus square foot facility. Same fee.
Hey, Ryan, I do get a lot of questions on that. People that sell to farmers markets and having their freezers inspected. Can you give us just a little bit of background on what that is and what's the cost involved if a person is going to be selling at farmers markets and things like that, and they got to have their farmers market, I guess, is there a farmers market fee and also a freezer fee?
Garen sells through farmers markets, so have him take that.
So I used to, but when we did it a few years ago, again, the gnats that came and killed everything, we got out of markets then. But so there's a farmers market fee, and when we did it, it was per county, and it was $100 per county. So we sold in Story and Polk County, and so there's $200 off the top. There's a warehouse fee, and we had that for 3 years, I think. The first year, and again, this is a few years ago, but it was like $350. It's not huge, and if you're Hy-Vee, it's a rounding error, but for us, it was a lot. And then the next years, based off of our sales, it was there's a comment in the chat that the fees for counties has gone up, and it was like $65 for the warehouse fee in subsequent years based off our sales, which, depending upon if you like regulation or not, is a lot better than $350, obviously. So there's the warehouse fee, and the inspector came out once in 3 years, right? Then there's the market fees. Then of course there's insurance for the markets, and then the markets charge you themselves, and it gets expensive real quick. But some of them seem less beneficial than others.
Well, and that fee is no longer $350. It's now $500 for your initial inspection.
Wow.
Yay.
And then your annual renewal, I had that form somewhere around here, is like at least $100 a year.
I believe the annual renewal is based on your sales.
But it's still, there's a minimum. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not a percentage or anything. So.
And who does this money go to?
IDOLs.
It goes to IDOLs. Okay.
Yeah. The Iowa Department of Inspection and Appeals.
Right.
Ethan, do you want to share what you had put in the chat?
Yeah, so it's based on, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi,
Okay.
Ethan.
It's based on, just real quick, it's based on the amount of sales you have, and it's like a really large range. Like the $100 one is something like, up to $500,000 in gross sales. But I actually had the state inspector come out. I've had the state inspector show up unannounced multiple times. I don't know if Matt Russell is in this one, but I know that he had him kind of show up the same day, and I think he gave me a heads up that he was in the area and heading around. But that was years ago. But like 2 years ago, he showed up, and he was actually there as a USDA, doing a USDA inspection. He said it was like a spot federal inspection. And it was much more intense, but he had no answers for me. Like he said, well, you need to have a chart tracking all the temperatures of your freezers. And I said, okay, how often do I need to do that? Well, I can't tell you. I was like, "Wait, you can't tell me, or you don't know, or it's not clear." And he said, well, basically it's not defined. So they don't have the rule made for it. So, but he was there I have 5 upright freezers in a 6x12 room. And he was there for 3 hours, which was insane because it just was. But as far as the processing goes, I think I've been just a few years less than Ryan as far as raising chickens. And I started out getting chickens from Fox Hollow Farm, getting chicks from Ty, and have been going along and used all the same processors that Ryan has used, and used Dunkins and the Martins this year. But I know, and I think this is probably just going to come down to state regulations. I know somebody put in there, they were trying to get to 20,000, and I can't remember if the federal is 10,000 exempt or 20,000, but I know that states can change the rules, and it's 20. And so I know that somewhere in the South, there's a guy who farms, raises chickens, but also does official chicken processing. And what he does is he goes to an official red meat processor and then rents their space from them on a couple days a week when they don't process. And I don't know if that's a regulation issue in Iowa. It would seem like it would help with some of those initial startup costs, because even in a mobile processing, I feel like the initial startup costs are so high. I remember, and if you have a built-in process, like a stationary processing, I remember talking to Ty at Story City, and he told me they spent like $30,000 on freezer doors alone. And so that's one thing. Yeah, that's it. Spencer, guy from Arkansas, he's got a podcast. So I thought that would be something to check into in Iowa. I'm afraid that it's state regulations are gonna get in the way of that.
Yeah, Ethan, I think you summed up a really strong point, that there's a lot of lack of answers. I think from the farmers I've heard, especially working with iDolls, there's no direct answers. It's a lot of kind of a lot of wishy-washy answers, which makes it really challenging to try to meet these regulations if you don't have direct answers.
Well, and then there's no clearinghouse for information anyway, because it's kind of sometimes split across departments. So it's like the situation that a lot of us, like if Tony Thompson was on here, he'd says like, I still find stuff that I'm not compliant with, and I've been doing prudent produce for years.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just, and it's all things. Like I had the inspector come, the very first time I had the inspector come to my farm for our warehouse license, he was, looking through all the freezers, checking the labels on this stuff. And I had rabbits, which there is same with chickens. There's a official processor in the state, and they fall under completely different rules than red meat. And the label on the rabbits is just like a mailing label, basically, with printed out on his home computer. And the inspector said, you can't have this in here. This is not inspected. This is not legal for you to resell. And I said, yes, it is. He is an inspected facility. He has a license through the state. And he said, no, it's not. I said, yeah, it is. Can you please check? And he went out to his car and came back in 20 minutes later, and he's like, oh, I guess you're right. So that kind of thing.
David, I'm sorry, I see your hand is raised and I haven't called on you. And if you're trying to speak, you're muted.
Or he gave up, I don't know.
I know he's been chatting.
That's cool. Yeah, I have seen him in the chat, so. And he knows his stuff pretty good.
I'm having trouble with the mic today.
There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just wanting to say, I mentioned a little bit of that in the chat in there, but I was just back from the APPA, American Pastured Poultry Producers Association Conference, first of the week. And just wanted to, I guess I should iterate that there was an FDA inspector there at the conference, and I asked him several of these questions that we've been talking about. And he was quite adamant that the facility was not inspected. The facility wasn't licensed. It was the process. And that you could go in there in a facility, and if you rented it, if it had been used as a USDA inspected processing plant, But if you went in there and didn't operate it in a certain way, then it didn't really matter. That you would not get inspection approval for your processing. So and that was kind of a problem for me, because if I'm going to do FDA inspected processing in a mobile plant, I've got to have space for a USDA inspector to be there on site. He's got to have an office. He's got to have a restroom available to him, and you just can't do that on a mobile platform. And so, getting USDA inspected mobile processing is just not going to be a viable option because of those requirements. But getting a mobile processing unit that you can take to a farm and let them use that equipment and rent that equipment and process themselves under a 1,000 or 20,000 exemption might be an option for you. So that's what I just wanted to drop in there. I'll back out and let everybody get onto it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues with that. And one other issue I've heard from others is lack of inspectors to inspect those mobile units as well. And somebody had asked a question about, Ethan asked about the need for USDA inspection. Are you talking about the commercial interstate shipment? So I think, I'm not sure, Brian, you may know better than I. Does it include poultry, or is it just red meat?
I have
Matt
not,
might know.
yeah, I've not that's not come up. I don't know.
It does include poultry. It's the CIS program. I think that may be what Ethan was talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, it does include poultry. And IDALS has been really pushing that. They really want people, on board with that. But it's rigorous. I mean, we looked at it and, it's, back to the rules and regulations. IDALS, they're getting their marching orders from FSIS, the federal government. And then they take a look at these laws, and then they try to figure out how they're going to implement them in Iowa. And so the state has some flexibility, but not a lot. They have to stay within, kind of the confines of what comes from Washington, D.C. on that. So the CIS program, it does run much like state official poultry processing does, but they are really, how do I say this? Kind of scared of it too a little bit, because they're underneath a lot of scrutiny from FSIS on making sure they get that right. So that's why we thought, well, we would try this as official, for a first year or two, and then maybe dip our toe into the federal side of the CIS Interstate Cooperative or whatever they call it, to see what that was like. But it's just last year there was just a lot of low inspectors aren't very many inspectors. So when you get an inspector, you got to kind of stick with them. The one that we got really needs to be trained in poultry. So, and that wasn't going to be feasible for them to do last year. So, and the gentleman, I think David brought up the mobile processing with USDA. Yes, the inspector would have to be there on site. You also, I don't know how they would do that with the testing. So you're required to do testing of Salmonella and Campylobacteria tests. My wife is shaking her head yes. So you would have to do those on-site testing there, and that would be challenging to be able to do that too as well. And then chilling, getting those birds down to temperature in a certain length of time would also be a real challenge. Both doing official poultry and USDA would be the same on doing that with mobile plant. They run much the same. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, and Matt, isn't there some issues of red meat and poultry being essentially it's not possible to do within the same facility, or the same, not necessarily facility, but it has to be two separate lines in a sense?
Yes. So what happened was when they adopted meat and poultry regulations back in the early 1990s, there was this thing called the Curtis Amendment. And the Curtis Amendment made it so that you could process official beef and custom beef both underneath the same roof. And you can't do that with poultry. You can't mix poultry and meat together. And also, you can't even process official poultry on one day and custom poultry on another day in the same building. They never were able to get that adopted either or changed. So you can't mix custom and official poultry or red meat and poultry together underneath the same building. So that was
that's
I have on.
That's federal.
That's both state and federal.
State and federal.
And Mark had asked a question about the 20,000 exemption. If you can get your own facility approved by the state, but for the 1,000 bird, you need to have a written plan. Is anybody knowledgeable on that?
Yeah, as far as I know, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, Iowa has adopted the federal standard of 1,000 birds. I believe some of our neighboring states have a much more lax number on that. I think Missouri uses the 20,000 without having uses the 20,000 like the 1,000 is treated in Iowa. So you can, but don't quote me on that. It's been many years since I've looked that up. I don't live in Missouri anymore either. I mean, it was an option we considered at one point.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the 20,000 exemption that makes it really hard is you can build this nice facility where you process your own birds. It's approved by the state, but you can't let another farmer bring their birds there and use your facility. But if it were mobile, then it could go to their farm and they could use it.
Well, there is a legal way to do it, and it was something that was discussed with Valley View's inspector on the DL, and that was to sell your birds to the farm, have them killed, put under his label, and then purchase back. So that was an option we considered in the doomsday of having almost no options. So I think it wasn't like an option we were excited about, but it was an option on the table.
I think that the unfair advantage that Valley View had that made Valley View last longer than most of obviously Martins has been around a long time, but what the unfair advantage that Valley View had was their labor.
Oh yeah.
And so I almost feel like all these are great discussions to have, but maybe we would be better off having a discussion with an Amish family and encouraging them to open up a processing plant, because he had, it seemed like every time I was down there, it's basically girls that are out of 8th grade and before they got married were his labor force. And so that was a lot easier to work with.
Right. Yeah, that is the thing, is like, how do you make these plants, viable year round? So Curtis Amendment would probably block us from running deer through them, which would be like, if you could idle them, clean them out, and then run deer through them all winter, you could at least, you could extend your revenue stream.
That's exactly right.
And this is not an issue. This is an issue that Iowa farmers are dealing with poultry, but it is also becoming an issue, I think, that possibly they're going to have to deal with lamb as well.
I was going to say goats, lamb,
and that's
pigs. Yeah.
Well, the pigs, the red meat, I'm not worried about pigs as much, but with the lamb, it's a rendering issue, and a cost of rendering for the lockers, and then the profitability of lambs for the lockers. And so I know that 3 lockers that we have worked with in the past have all quit doing lamb. They'll still do all the other stuff. They just don't want to mess with lamb. And so maybe we need like a rabbit, chicken, lamb, goat processor. And I think that would, obviously the challenge is the poultry and the red meat together, but.
Right.
Yeah, I think, Ethan, you brought up a really strong point that the profitability of operating a poultry processing unit is the labor is really one of your largest challenges from what I've heard. And I see Matt and Ryan shaking their heads.
So true.
Yeah, and because like somebody earlier was talking about their mobile one that they're doing now, and they said they were doing 30 an hour. Was that Randy?
Randy, yeah.
But like, I want to do batches of 300 or actually I want to do batches much larger than 300, but at 30 an hour, that's
Right.
I usually go out and schedule 100 a day. And then I
Yeah.
mean, you got your drive time, you drive for an hour,
Yeah.
you got your heat up. And so, yeah, it's just small stuff. And the workforce, like they were talking about, high school kids, that's who I get to go with me. It's high school kids.
Yeah, the days of getting people to come out to your farm and kill chickens with you is it feel like they're not as prevalent as they used to be. But yeah, I mean, we could kill quite a few. Three of us running an automated scalder and a picker. I mean, on farm we kill 200 birds in 4 hours, something like that. Yeah.
All right. So we've got about 10 minutes left of this session.
Everybody's stressed now, great. It's
I know there's so many multiple pieces to this. So I am actually recording this and I will recap this as well. So before we leave, I want to make sure if you want to continue this conversation or if you want to continue to be part of this conversation, put your email in or contact info in the chat box and I will pull that and create a group from that and recap the things that we've talked about today as well, because I think there's a lot of different directions that things can go. One thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about is we've talked about some different policy efforts to work to change some of these regulations. Is there anyone that has some policy ideas or efforts that they're working on that they want to share that either might be able to collaborate or build some coalition around?
Yeah, this is Randy. I've been working with a couple different legislatures, and they've come down and we're working on changes, and they've got to, I guess, go over what changes need made to be able to sell to farmers market from when I go out and butcher. I mean, at least get it to farmers market. That's a starting point where they can't sell. They have to be sold before I show up. And then there's another legislature I'm working with at the same. He's trying to get horse introduced in the market. Oh. So to get horse meat out there as a option of stuff. So there's a few people working on stuff. It's good to know, that at least they're looking at it, and I'll just keep bugging them and see what happens.
Randy, do you know the names of who you've had out there handy or not? If not, you can.
Jesse Green's one of them that I've been in contact with just recently within the last few months. And
Sure.
And then the one that came out on the farm, there was two of them that came out that one day. Somebody said their names here in this video.
Landon, I know, was out. I don't know who else was out.
Yeah, there was two of them that come out that
okay.
day.
I'll have to talk with Levon about that.
And told them the changes that need made in the meat regulations and stuff like that. And so maybe they got something going already because that was this last summer.
With the Curtis thing, that's going to require some heavier lifting. But somebody like I think it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to schedule a conversation with like Axne at her reps at her office in West Des Moines and just like, hey, this is what we're concerned about. How do we attack this? Because if we can take it, if we can do something at the federal level, we can then open it up at the state level and then play a long game. I mean, we're not talking about overnight, but these things don't change quickly usually. So
does PFI have a lobbyist?
We do not.
Iowa Farmers Union has some and does more of that kind of lobbying type stuff.
So I was an advocacy officer for HIMSS and on that committee for the Good Growers. I would be so I'm familiar with the steps that we take to be successful to push and help getting representatives from the different counties to help push things. So I'd volunteer my services to help move forward those conversations and agendas and grassroots movement.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy.
I guess I was going to ask, you had asked if anybody had policy ideas. Is that correct?
Yeah.
One of the things we've just started some conversations with some of our representatives in Minnesota about how they could potentially provide resources for technical assistance and training, because there's just so much ongoing training and technical stuff in order to keep an operation running.
Yeah, you're talking from the processor standpoint.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a large one as well, especially when labor is such a tight piece of this.
I mean, I do think the processing might be hard. I think the thing you could make some progress on in the near term would be dealing with that inspection, just trying to create more granularity in the freezer inspection structure. At least starting there is a place to get some kind of win. I mean, it's not directly what you want, but it's something that's tangential. So if you needed to show progress, like that would be focused more locally, that would be a place you might do that. But like attacking addressing the Curtis Amendment issues, that's going to be probably federal and then state. So.
One thing helpful too would be we're required to do a very rigorous testing of E. coli. No, not E. coli. They did remove that one. Salmonella and Campylobacteria. And they have the standards set so tight, and it's almost a zero, negative amount that you can have prevalent. And that is a real tough thing to do. You have to use some very, very harsh chemicals to get that to be able to pass that. And I think maybe in Iowa I think Iowa might even be more rigid than even the FSIS. I mean, I think Iowa's so really pretty scared of a possible lawsuit or something from an inspected processor for Salmonella and Campy that it is basically impossible to pass, and it's very expensive to do the testing and the chemicals to be able to get that to pass. So
if you fail that test, isn't there significant ramifications if you do it multiple times? Like that was.
Yes, as far as I know, I think you can fail a few and then they put you on probation, and then the federal boys come in and they look at your entire, system of how you're processing, and then they begin to make you make changes like, okay, well, this table isn't working, you need to put this on a line, or the line's not working, you need to use a table. So they start making recommendations that are going to cost a lot of money.
Well, I think Valley View had issues with it and had gone to the air-cooled rack system and got out of the vat cooling because of their issues with the salmonella. They had hit the mark repeatedly.
So if there was something that could be done for small plants, because you have to follow the same guidelines as large facilities. Mm-hmm. But if you're a small plant, say doing, 100,000 a year, there should be some, like you should be able to do less testing or, something that can help out in that. That's been, kind of our pet peeve with all this going forward, because it is very tough to maintain that.
What's the cost associated on your end too? I'm just curious.
I would say that from buying the solution and the testing, it's costly. The tests you have to do every time you process, and they're about $50. Sure. So the state does theirs, they do their own set, and then they make you also do yours. So the state pays for theirs, we pay for ours, and then the solution to use is very costly. I would say that it probably adds us about an $80 a day to our cost.
Gotcha. That is fairly consequential, especially when you look at it over just an operating month or a season. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, so if you're processing every day, that adds up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Good to know. Good to know. And that's driven at the federal level, isn't it? And the state is adopting a standard potentially that's more rigorous than the federal level.
Yeah, and that's because we looked at the federal level, and read through and even talked to them, and they're like, oh, it's no big deal. You just do this, this, and this. And the state initially told us, yes, that's the way it was. And then they don't want to ever be boxed into a corner. So they say, no, you can do this, but we really want you to do this, So it just seems like maybe they didn't know because they're not, there aren't a lot of plants in the state. Maybe they just didn't want, covering a liability or something too. So it's, they didn't have any clear answers for us, but in this business, there is never any clear answers from the state.
I've heard that a lot. Cool.
For sure.
Good to know that.
All right. Well, we have a minute left. So this is huge. I know these are not new conversations. These are many conversations that have happened before. And our purpose of really putting on this roundtable is keeping this momentum going and bringing together some of these voices, because I know there's many people working on different pieces of this problem. We've brought up some new ones. I know, Ethan, you're talking about lamb. That's one that's affecting me greatly right now, and a lot of other farmers in our network as well.